Have you ever paused to ask why you believe what you believe? Where do your intuitions about right and wrong, or your ideas about reality and the meaning of life truly come from? They feel like your own personal truths, yet often they are echoes of arguments and insights from centuries, even millennia ago. These ideas weren't born in a vacuum. They were developed in the minds of thoughtful individuals, debated in ancient public squares, and captured in texts that have outlasted empires. For less than 25 minutes, we'll embark on a quiet journey through 2.5 millennia of this world-shaping thought. We will explore the foundational ideas that have shaped our reality, from the bustling markets of ancient Athens to the world we inhabit today. This is the story of how humanity began to think about thinking itself. 1. The ancient Greeks, the dawn of reason. Our story begins in ancient Greece, around the 6th century BCE. Before this era, if you asked one of life's big questions, the answer would likely involve myths and a pantheon of powerful gods. But then, a new kind of thinker emerged, one who wasn't satisfied with stories of divine intervention. They sought rational explanations. These were the pre-Socratics, the West's first philosophers. A man named Thales of Miletus observed the world and made a profound claim that everything, at its core, is made of water. This might sound simple to us now, but it was a significant shift. He attempted to explain the entire cosmos using a single natural principle: no gods required. Soon after, Heraclitus argued that the only constant is change itself, famously stating, "You can't step into the same river twice." In response, Parmenides contended that logically, change must be an illusion, because being is a single, eternal, and unchanging reality. These early thinkers set the stage for philosophy's most enduring questions. What is real, and how do we know? The focus of philosophy then shifted in 5th century Athens with the arrival of Socrates, a man so influential he never wrote down a single word. Socrates was less concerned with the composition of the universe and more deeply concerned with how we ought to live. He was Athens' street corner philosopher, wandering about and engaging everyone he met, questioning their beliefs about justice, virtue, and knowledge. In doing so, he developed the Socratic method, a form of cooperative, patient questioning designed to help people examine their own assumptions and expose their contradictions. For Socrates, the purpose of philosophy was self-knowledge. He famously declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living," a challenge that continues to challenge and inspire. Socrates' star student, Plato, took his teacher's ideas and developed a comprehensive philosophical system. Plato observed the chaotic, imperfect world around him and was deeply troubled. How can we understand true justice if all we see are unjust acts? His answer was the theory of forms. He argued that the physical world we perceive is not the real world. It is merely a shadow, an imperfect copy of a higher, eternal realm of perfect concepts, the forms. Consider this. You have seen many different horses, all of them unique and flawed. Yet, in your mind, you hold the concept of a perfect horse. For Plato, that perfect concept is more real than any physical horse. He illustrates this in his allegory of the cave, where humanity is chained, watching shadows on a wall and mistaking it for reality. The philosopher's task for Plato is to break free, climb out of the cave, and perceive the true forms. Plato's most gifted student, Aristotle, held a different view. While Plato gazed toward the heavens, Aristotle focused on the world right here around us. A true polymath, a biologist and physicist as much as a philosopher, he believed knowledge comes from observing the world and gathering experience. He set aside Plato's two worlds theory, arguing that reality is the one we see in front of us. For Aristotle, every object is a combination of its physical matter and its defining form. He catalogued everything from animals to systems of government and, in the process, essentially invented the formal study of logic. In ethics, Aristotle asked, "What is the ultimate purpose of a human life?" His answer was eudaimonia, a word often translated as happiness, but better understood as human flourishing. "We achieve this," he said, "by living a life of reason and virtue, by finding the golden mean between extremes. For example, courage is the perfect balance between cowardice and recklessness." Aristotle's systematic approach would become a cornerstone of Western thought for centuries. After these foundational thinkers, Hellenistic philosophy became more personal. The Stoics, including the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, taught self-control and the acceptance of one's fate. They argued that you cannot control external events, only your reaction to them. The Epicureans, on the other hand, proposed that the goal of life is pleasure, not wild indulgence, but the quiet, tranquil state of being free from pain and fear. Both offered a framework for how to live a good life in an unpredictable world. 2. The Middle Ages, Faith and Reason. Following the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe entered the Middle Ages, and philosophy gained a new partner, Christian theology. The central project for thinkers of this long period was to reconcile the rational heritage of the Greeks with religious faith. Augustine of Hippo was a pivotal figure who skillfully integrated Plato's philosophy into Christian doctrine. He envisioned Plato's world of perfect forms as existing within the mind of God. Augustine grappled with timeless questions like the problem of evil. If God is all good, where does evil originate? He concluded that evil is not a substance in itself, but rather the absence of good, a void made possible by humanity's gift of free will. Centuries later, Thomas Aquinas undertook the monumental task of merging Aristotle's work with Christianity. While Augustine had leaned on Plato, Aquinas built his entire theology on Aristotle's logical and empirical foundation. He argued that faith and reason were not adversaries, but two different yet harmonious paths leading to the same truth. He famously laid out 5 rational arguments for the existence of God, his 5 ways, which utilized Aristotle's own ideas about causes and motion. Aquinas' work, particularly his Summa Theologiae, became the bedrock of Catholic philosophy, creating a powerful synthesis of Greek reason and Christian faith. 3. The modern mind, the rebirth of reason. As Europe emerged from the Middle Ages, the Renaissance and the scientific revolution ushered in a new intellectual era. This was the age of reason, and thinkers began to question everything, including the very foundation of knowledge itself. The figure who sparked this movement was René Descartes, often called the father of modern philosophy. Living in a time of profound scientific and religious change, Descartes sought to find one thing, anything, that he could know with absolute certainty. He began a process of methodical doubt, discarding any belief for which he could find even the slightest reason to question. He doubted his senses, noting they can be deceptive. He even doubted whether he was awake or merely in a vivid dream. He was left with almost nothing. But then he had a breakthrough. Even in the act of doubting, something had to be doing the doubting. His own thinking was the one thing he could not deny. This led him to the most famous statement in philosophy, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This single certainty became the foundation of his entire system. From this point, he argued for a distinct separation between the mind, the thinking thing, and the body, the physical thing, a concept known as mind-body dualism that would fuel debate for centuries. Descartes' emphasis on pure reason launched a movement called rationalism. Soon, however, a compelling counter-argument emerged from Britain: empiricism. John Locke, a leading empiricist, challenged Descartes' framework. For Locke, the human mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. All of our knowledge, he argued, is constructed from experience gathered through our five senses. This was an idea with profound implications. If we are all born as blank slates, then no one is inherently superior to anyone else. This idea became the foundation for his political philosophy, in which he argued that governments require the consent of the governed, and that every person has natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Ideas that would directly inspire the American Revolution.
The tension between rationalism and empiricism defined the 17th and 18th centuries. Rationalists like Baruch Spinoza envisioned a deterministic universe where God and nature were one and the same. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz argued that our world, despite its flaws, must be the best of all possible worlds. Meanwhile, the empiricist David Hume pushed Locke's ideas to their logical and unsettling conclusion. Hume argued that if all knowledge comes from sense experience, then we cannot be certain about anything that extends beyond our immediate sensations. He famously challenged the concept of cause and effect. You see one billiard ball strike another, and the second one moves. You assume the first caused the motion, but Hume asks, did you ever actually see the causation itself? No, you only saw one event followed by another. We merely infer the connection out of habit. This deep skepticism seemed to threaten the foundations of both science and reason. It was into this philosophical crossroads that Immanuel Kant stepped, arguably the most important philosopher of the modern era. Kant aimed to rescue knowledge from Hume's skepticism by synthesizing rationalism and empiricism. In his influential masterpiece, The Critique of Pure Reason, he argued that yes, our knowledge begins with experience, as the empiricists claimed. However, our mind is not a passive blank slate. It actively structures that experience using innate categories, such as space, time, and crucially, causality. Therefore, we can never know the world in itself, what he called the noumenal world. We can only know the world as it appears to us, filtered through our own mental framework, the phenomenal world. In ethics, Kant introduced the categorical imperative. One formulation states, act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. Simply put, before you act, ask yourself if you would want everyone in the world to do the same thing in the same situation. If the answer is no, if you are making a special exception for yourself, then the act is morally wrong. For Kant, morality was not about feelings or outcomes, it was about rational duty. 4. The 19th century, ideology and upheaval. The 19th century was an age of grand, ambitious systems and equally grand critiques. philosophy began to grapple directly with history, society, and the human condition. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel constructed one of the most comprehensive systems ever devised. He viewed all of reality and history as a rational, unfolding process he called the dialectic. An idea or historical moment, the thesis, generates its own opposite, the antithesis. The conflict between them is resolved in a new, higher state, the synthesis, which then becomes the new thesis, and the cycle continues, always moving forward. For Hegel, history was the story of spirit coming to understand itself. But where Hegel saw reason as the engine of history, Arthur Schopenhauer saw a blind, irrational, and purposeless force he called the will, a constant, striving, and ultimately unsatisfying desire that he identified as the source of all suffering. He was one of the first major Western thinkers to be deeply influenced by Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism. He believed the only escape was to deny the will through aesthetic contemplation or asceticism. This focus on individual experience paved the way for Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism. Reacting against Hegel's vast impersonal system, Kierkegaard championed the passionate, subjective individual. He argued that the most important truths are personal, and that faith in God was not a matter of rational proof, but a leap of faith into the unknown. Of course, no thinker had a greater real-world impact than Karl Marx. Marx inverted Hegel's dialectic. He argued that it wasn't ideas driving history, but material and economic conditions, a theory known as historical materialism. For Marx, all of history was the history of class struggle, the conflict between the bourgeoisie, the owners of capital, and the proletariat, the workers. He believed capitalism was inherently exploitative and destined for collapse, which would eventually lead to a classless, communist society. His ideas would go on to reshape global politics. In Britain, John Stuart Mill offered a different vision. He was a key proponent of utilitarianism, the ethical theory that the most moral action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. He was also a strong advocate for individual liberty, arguing in his book On Liberty that the only justifiable reason to restrict a person's freedom is to prevent harm to others. But perhaps the most provocative voice of the century belonged to Friedrich Nietzsche, who arrived on the philosophical scene with significant impact. Nietzsche was a master of critique. He famously declared God is dead, meaning that the Enlightenment's own reliance on reason had eroded the foundations of traditional religion and morality, leaving humanity in a void of meaning he called nihilism. He challenged what he called slave morality, Judeo-Christian values like pity and humility, which he believed made humanity weak. In its place, he championed a master morality based on the will to power, the fundamental drive to grow, overcome, and achieve. His ideal was the Übermensch, or Overman, a future human who creates their own values and affirms life in all its tragic beauty. These ideas didn't just challenge old systems, they invited each of us to confront uncomfortable questions. If old values no longer hold, what will you build in their place? If this journey through the history of thought has sparked your curiosity and prompted you to reflect on your own reality, consider subscribing and enabling notifications. We hope you will join us as we continue these explorations. And the story doesn't end here. In the next section, we'll see how the 20th century shattered the old certainties entirely, replacing grand systems with fragmented perspectives and radical freedom. Let's step into that world. 5. The 20th century and beyond, fragmentation and freedom. In the 20th century, philosophy branched into numerous competing schools, each attempting to make sense of the modern world. The two major streams are often called analytic and continental philosophy. Analytic philosophy, which became dominant in the English-speaking world, was pioneered by thinkers like Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein. Its focus was on logic, precision, and language. Wittgenstein's early work proposed that many classic philosophical problems were not problems at all, but confusions arising from the misuse of language. He saw the philosopher's job as clarifying language, causing the apparent problems to simply dissolve. Continental philosophy, which flourished in mainland Europe, continued the 19th century tradition of tackling broad questions of human existence. Phenomenology, founded by Edmund Husserl, sought to become a rigorous science of consciousness by carefully describing the structure of our experience. Husserl's student, Martin Heidegger, used this method to return to the fundamental question of being itself. But the most well-known movement from this tradition was existentialism, popularized in post-war France by figures like Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus. Sartre's defining phrase was, "Existence precedes essence." He meant that we are not born with a predefined purpose or nature. We are, instead, thrown into the world as radically free beings, condemned to be free. We must create our own essence, our own meaning, through the choices we make, and we bear the full responsibility for those choices. Simone de Beauvoir insightfully applied this framework to feminism, famously writing, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman," arguing that woman is largely a social construct, not just a biological reality. Later in the century, post-structuralism, with thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, challenged the very ideas of stable meaning and objective truth. Foucault explored the intricate link between knowledge and power, arguing that institutions like prisons and hospitals function as systems of social control. Derrida developed deconstruction, a method of reading texts to reveal how they unintentionally undermine their own claims to a single stable meaning. This entire journey has been a brief tour through the Western tradition. It is just one major river of thought on a much larger map. Around the world, other profound philosophical traditions were asking similar questions. In China, Confucianism focused on social harmony and ethical conduct, while Taoism taught living in alignment with the Tao, the natural flow of the universe. In India, rich traditions like Buddhism and Vedanta explored consciousness, reality, and the path to liberation. And while Europe was in its Middle Ages, the Islamic world was a center of philosophical innovation, where thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes not only preserved the works of the ancient Greeks, but also made their own remarkable contributions. So there you have it, 2,500 years of philosophy in 25 minutes. We've journeyed from the Greek quest for cosmic order, through the medieval synthesis of faith and reason, to the modern era's focus on doubt, and finally to the 20th century's profound embrace of freedom and its critique of truth itself. The key takeaway is that philosophy is not a static subject confined to dusty books. It is a living, breathing conversation that began thousands of years ago and continues today in our debates about AI ethics, political justice, and the search for personal meaning. The specific questions may evolve, but the core impulse remains the same: to use our reason to make sense of our world and our place within it. So I will end by turning the Socratic method back to you. After all this, after hearing from Plato and Nietzsche, from Kant and de Beauvoir, which of these ideas challenges you the most? And what do you believe now? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy exploring ideas like these, don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Thank you and see you in the next video.